Welcome to episode 30 of Warmaster's Workshop. First, before we'd like to get started, I want to thank all my Patreon sponsors over the years who allowed us to get to episode 30. It's been a very long and challenging road, but we've done it together, and I couldn't have gotten here without you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I look forward to producing 30 more episodes of Warmaster's Workshop. So, welcome to this month's Warmaster's Workshop. Today, we're going to be molding a 3D printed and primed and finished helmet. So, before we get started today, let's look at the helmet itself and how it should look. We'll talk a little bit here about how it should look before we get into the molding portion of this. So, as you can see, this 3D helmet is completely primed. It's actually, if you caught the previous Warmaster's Workshop shorts, you would have seen the wet sanding video that we released in September of 2020. And there you would have seen all the wet sanding that was involved in this. But it was essentially I would say about 5 layers of primer wet sanded down so that it's nice and smooth. There's no print lines showing on this helmet. We don't want print lines because those can be picked up by the mold. So there's no print lines here on this outer surface of the helmet, and it really just turned out very nice. All of the detail came out really nice. I'll scoot this back so you can see here. All of this detail just came out nicely. So this is where you want your helmet to be if you've got a 3D printed helmet. This is how you want it to look before you mold it. And so now that we've gone over that, let's get down to the business of turning this helmet into a mold for resin casting. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to seal this helmet. For the most part, it is nice and sealed up because of the paint, but there also is some porous areas, so we want to go ahead and get that done. What I'm going to use is some Smooth-On Super Seal. You want to really shake this stuff up well. It says on the top, shake well before using. So we're going to shake it really well. I've got a cup here, just a regular graduated plastic cup, and a bristle brush. I'm using that versus a sponge brush because I want to make sure that I get it in every little nook and cranny. And with the sponge brush, you'll get a lot of liquid on there, but you may not be able to push it in the places that you need to with a sponge brush. So if all you have is a sponge brush, it's fine, but if you have a bristle brush, sometimes those tend to work a little bit better for these type of applications. I do have a fresh piece of plastic down on my table here. So we've shaken that up so it's nice, and you can look in there, it's nice and shaken. I'm just going to pour some in the cup here. It says it takes about 10 minutes for this stuff to dry. I'm not going to use a whole lot. Actually, you need a little more than that. I can always push it back, put it back in the can, and all we're going to do is we're going to coat this, give it a nice coating of the Super Seal, and what that does is that's going to give us a nice sealed surface. It's going to be even more smooth than it currently is. I'm not sure how that's possible, but it is. Ooh, this stuff has a smell to it. Make sure you work in a nice ventilated area. It is a little smellies. I can see it evaporating. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to coat this fully with the Super Seal, and then we're going to come back, we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to give it another coat. I'm going to put 2 coats of Super Seal on here at least. May put more than that, but let's get through the first coat, and then we'll come back and we'll see how it looks. So we put 2 coats of the Super Seal on the helmet, and that remember that that filled up any porous surfaces. It helped level the surface. Basically, it's just the wax. It's a wax coating, so it's even more smooth now than it was before. But we let it dry for about an hour on the second coat. Actually, I let it dry overnight, but the instructions say at a minimum let it dry for an hour. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start out pouring our silicone, but we're going to start kind of gradually, and we're going to get this part first because this is where the bulk of the detail is in the mohawk here, or the fin, and then down here in the computer block on the back. So we want to make sure that we get plenty of silicone in those areas, get it without air bubbles. So we're going to look at some using a vacuum chamber to get the air bubbles out. But here's our silicone. It's a lot. It comes in two parts. You've seen me use this before. What we're going to do is we're going to get 3 ounces in each of these cups. I'm just going to spoon this stuff out here. Oh, this is the part B. Okay. Now we're going to use another one. And one thing you want to make sure you're doing, or when you use the gloves, when you're using rubber gloves, make sure that they are vinyl gloves, not latex gloves. If you use latex gloves, that's actually really bad. It will cause the silicone to, it'll inhibit the silicone from actually curing, and that can be a problem. So, all right, looks like we're pretty close to 3.5 ounce or 3 ounces here. The other good thing about silicone is that it is a little bit forgiving. So in the event you've got a little too much part A or part B, it will still cure. Now, one thing to remember is that this silicone has got 20-minute pot life. So we got to put it in. We got to make sure that we've got enough time to get it in the vacuum chamber and then get it on the helmet. And it's very important, at least in my opinion, that you get the detail layer vacuum chambered out. I'm not as concerned with the subsequent layers, but the detail layer, which is the first layer, you want that, you want the silicone to be as air bubble free as you can humanly get it. Alright, so this is the vacuum chamber. I'm going to hit the pump here. You might hear this, it might get a little loud. Now what we're doing is we're creating a vacuum, and that's pulling the air out of the silicone. See if I can position this a little bit better here. There you go. Now you can see those air bubbles coming out of the silicone, and basically what we want is we want the dial on the gauge right here to read 30. And the silicone, it's expanding, and then it's kind of falling back on itself. I'm just going to let that oxygen continue to pull out. When you're in a small container like this, you've really got to manage that vacuum, because what will happen is your silicone will end up spilling out of your cup there. We've got this down to 30 millibars, and you can still see that there's oxygen still coming out of there. So we've left it here for a few minutes. I would say the air bubble reaction is slowing down tremendously. We really want most of those bubbles to pop, so that's kind of what I'm waiting on here. But negative 30 millibars of pressure is just about a perfect vacuum. I keep turning on the vacuum pump every now and then just to see, but yeah, I'm not really seeing any more. There's very little popping left. There we go. Some of the bigger bubbles are starting to burst there. There's a big bubble coming up. I don't know if you can see it right in the middle there. It's slowly making its way up. Slowly making its way up. Now, just a fun fact, but this is what happens if you get sucked out into space. There it is. That's what we've been waiting for. So now we've had it in here for probably, I don't know, I'd say about 3 or 4 minutes, close to 5 minutes. We can leave it in here up to 10 if we want to. I don't know if I'm going to leave it in here for the full 10 because it is a little bit warm in the shop since I got to turn the server on to start filming. So I don't want to chance my pot lifetime too much, but I don't want these air bubbles to be a problem. So I think what we're going to go ahead and do now, we've got most of them out. It's collapsed back on itself. I think we lost a couple little drops of silicone. You can see them down there on the side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this off. You have to turn one valve off. So I'm going to turn this so you can see. So this is the pump valve. We turn that off because we don't want oil to come back up through the system. And then we gently open up our tank valve. Wow, and yeah, there's really nothing that... Yep. It's nice. Alright, so let's move back to the table and we'll start the pouring process. Alright, so we're going to start pouring this over our helmet. Let me make sure I've got this centered. I also have a small pick right here so that if I see an air bubble, I'll be able to pop it. Because we are going to be... a hair right there. Don't want that getting on. We do want to make sure that we capture as much of these details as possible. And this is probably one of the most highly detailed spots of the helmet. In fact, this is where pretty much all the detail is. Alright. So for now, I'm going to let that sit like that. I'm going to let that sort of run over. Just going to pull this around down the helmet here. This is also where the deepest areas in the helmet are as well. I should say the deepest angles of the helmet are here. Don't be afraid if you drip some silicone off. That's going to happen. Because even though this is brushable silicone, gravity does work on it. It's going to be a little messy. Don't stress the mess. That ought to be the tagline of doing silicone. Don't stress the mess, because it will be. Not much you can do about that. Still have a whole bunch of silicone up here that needs to move down. Actually, we'll move it out here. I'm going to switch to a bristle brush here, just because it's a little bit easier to deal with than a sponge brush. And yes, you can wipe this stuff over with your fingers. Of course, it does make dealing with the helmet a little bit more messy, but I guess it is what it is. Alright, let's get some more of this silicone out. And the great thing about silicone too is, even if you don't get it all on there, like even if you don't cover the entire helmet with the first pour, that's fine. You're not committing any sins or anything. Alright, now I'm just using a popsicle stick here to spread this out. Alright, so we've got our first layer of silicone down, our what they call detail layer. It did take 2 coats. We got most of the helmet done with 1 coat, and then we had to go back and get the front done with the 2nd coat, and then we touched it up a little bit with that 2nd coat. So I'm just gonna turn this around here so you can see how it looks. Now I did put a fair amount of silicone here at the top, at the dome, because that usually needs to be thickened just a little bit extra, just because when you pull the helmet off, that's where most of the negative pressure is at, or negative force is at. So, as you can see, the whole helmet is covered. It's still drippy. As you can see, there's some little stringers down there, so it's still wet. Part of it is, well, since silicone's all over it, it should cure pretty much at the same time at this point. So we're going to leave it here overnight and let it cure, and then we'll check it out tomorrow, and we'll add our next layer, which will be a thickening layer. It's not going to be like a thickened silicone layer. It's just going to be another layer of silicone that we use to thicken this. And we'll probably do 2 more layers of silicone, and then we'll end up doing a final thickened layer, and then we'll do our Plasti-Paste mother mold on top of that. So we still have several more layers to go yet. This is just the detail layer, where we're going to get all of our shape and everything is going to come from this layer. So, and there's no air bubbles that we can see. I haven't seen any air bubbles. So that's a good sign. And we'll come back to this in the morning and we'll see how it is and we'll go from there. Alright, so our first base coat of silicone has cured. We call this this is like the detail coat. So we've got all of our details captured. You can see right here where, as I was moving this around, I did lift it away a little bit from the helmet. That's okay, as long as you make sure it's nice and flat and flush against the helmet before you start on to your next layer of silicone, then you should be good. We've also got a couple little spots. Let's see if I can turn this. There's a spot over here and a spot and some under the brow here where we need to put a little extra silicone under there to fill those spots in, but otherwise it turned out pretty well. I've already pre-measured my parts A and B, so I'm going to go ahead and just making sure this is cleaned out here. I don't want to contaminate my... This is just a regular plastic pitcher. And I'm just going to go ahead and pour this in. And the reason I'm using this plastic pitcher is just because it's easier to mix in. And it's easier to pour out because it's got this nice spout on it. And then once the silicone cures, you can just pull the cured silicone right out of it. So it's pretty easy. Now the other thing we're not going to worry about doing on this, we're not going to worry about putting this in the vacuum chamber. That was really only for the first coat. I wanted to make sure there was no air bubbles. For this coat, since it's not really a detail coat, I'm less worried about air bubbles. Some people may have a different opinion on that, and that's fine. So I know that there's some makers out there who will vacuum form all of their silicone layers, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's definitely not going to hurt the silicone. Does it make a better product or a better end product? I don't know. I think there's probably just as many arguments for it as there is against it. I like using silicone spatulas because you can really scrape the edges down of your mixing container, be it a pitcher like this, or if it's a large, if it's a bucket, small bucket, large cup, whatever. It's like mixing cake batter, but you can scrape down these sides. It's super important for getting both of these parts mixed together properly. Plus, again, it allows you to scrape so you don't waste anything. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, now that this is mixed, I'm just going to pour this right over the top. Rake off a little bit here. So I've got a nice clean exit. I'm going to turn this, start moving this silicone around. So I'm going to keep doing this. We're going to get this all coated with this second layer, and then we'll come back to it and we'll take a look and we'll see how it looks. So we have our silicone, our second layer of silicone spread evenly across the helmet, and just going to pull the camera around here a little bit so you can see how this looks. And down towards the bottom here, you can actually see the silicone streaming just a little bit. but it's quite a bit of it has dripped off, and that will happen. It's going to drip like that, and because it's, I mean, it is still a viscous material, so it's still a liquid, which means it's you're going to have that gravity's going to pull it down. So we're going to let this sit here. We're going to let it cure, and then after that, we're going to put another layer on it. We're going to put about, I'd say we're probably going to put another, probably 3 or so layers, maybe 4 more layers of silicone like this on it. And then we're going to do our Thivex silicone layer, which is our thickened silicone, and that's going to be our final jacket there of silicone. And then after that, we'll do our we'll make our mother mold with the plasti paste. So we still got a few more layers of silicone to do on this. The silicone portion, what we'll probably do next is we'll probably, before we put the next coat of silicone on, I think we're going to flip the helmet and we'll do silicone around the bottom, and we'll make our silicone gasket, so that when we pour this, when we pour the resin into this, we'll have this nice lip, and that will that'll keep the silicone from coming out, or I'm sorry, the resin from coming out when we pour it. So we'll let this cure. We'll come back and get to work on the next step. Okay, so we let our second layer of silicone cure, and at this point, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and make my silicone lip before I get the rest of my layers of silicone on here. That way, those layers will bond well here along the sides, and I won't have to worry about this layer here needing to be thicker or needing to be as thick as the walls. I don't want this layer of silicone to really be that thick. I want it to be fairly thin, and in it being thin, it'll remain flexible so that I can still, peel it up so that I can get the helmet out. So I also don't want it to be a huge wall, but I want it to be enough so that when I go to slush cast this helmet, it will hold the resin back. So I went ahead and I've got this is a 1 fluid ounce of part A, and I've got another fluid ounce of part B. So I'm just gonna pour these in the cup. Now, if you want, you can add some thickener to thicken this lip here. I'm not really going to do that. Mainly, what I'm doing, my goal here is just to create a bit of a boundary. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm also not worried about it being bubble free. Now, one thing you're going to notice is there's this sort of brown substance here. This is just plastiline clay. I took it and I made a nice flat. This was 3D printed. This helmet in the bottom. This was, still had all the 3D lines, and it was fairly deep. It wasn't finished on the bottom. It didn't need to be. So I took the plastiline clay and I just covered the bottom with a super thin layer. And all we're going to do now, gently, because you don't want to get it over the edge, I'm just going to gently spoon this stuff out. That's enough for the moment. Then I'm going to take a brush here that's just a foam brush. Now, if some of the silicone goes inside the helmet casting, that's fine. Remember, it'll pull out. It's not going to stick to anything. We can also trim this if your lip here is a little bit too much. If you've got too much or too wide a lip, you can always trim this once it's cured with an X-Acto knife if you need to. Now, this step isn't absolutely necessary. You don't necessarily have to have a lip on your mold. It just makes the resin casting portion a little bit easier and a little less of a potential for losing resin or making huge messes. Hold this in because right here where the T area is, this part of the silicone mold likes to raise just a little bit. One thing you want to make sure you don't want to get silicone between the helmet and your other silicone jacket here. Take that right to the edge. It goes over the edge again like that, not a big deal. We'll be trimming that a little bit anyway, so it's not a problem. If you have any leftover silicone like we have here, of course, you don't want to waste it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this silicone here around the brow. I'm sorry, not around the brow, around the visor area up to the brow. That tends to be, at least for this specific helmet, that tends to be where the silicone is at its thinnest, because it spills over this brow and it gets difficult to get in that area there. And if the silicone is thin, anywhere where it's thin, you run the risk of the mold tearing. And gosh, we don't want that. Alright, so we have let our silicone cure here on the inner lip. I went ahead and cut it from the side here so that, as you can see, it lifts up. It's a relatively thin coat. I mean, it's thick enough so that it has some mass there, but it is very thin. I've cut it away, and I've also trimmed down the little strings from our layers of silicone. Also, what I've done, just to show this, is that I've popped some air holes, and this was just in the second layer of silicone. So I've popped these air holes, and I made it so that we can get silicone in there just to strengthen those areas up so that we don't have any gaps. I've already gone ahead and pre-measured my silicone. I'm going to move this up just a little bit so that, and I measured another 6 ounces of each, so that's going to be 12 total ounces of silicone we're going to be mixing up here, just like the last layer. So we're going to go ahead and pour this on the helmet. Alright, get that little stringer off there. I'm just going to start, as we've done every other time, just going to start moving this around the helmet. Alright, so I'm going to continue spreading this silicone out, and then we're going to let this cure, and we'll come back to it. We'll see how this looks, and then we'll decide how many more layers we need to put on after this. We've got 5 good coats so far of silicone on our helmet. So what I want to do now is just sort of break away from that to work on the next portion of the helmet, and what we need to do before we start putting the thicker, the thickened silicone on. And what we need to make are some silicone registration keys. what these are going to do is we're going to stick these on the helmet when we do our thickened silicone. We're going to put these on, we're going to mold them out of silicone, and we're going to stick them to the helmet when we do the thickened silicone. And these are going to make registration keys so that when we make the mother mold, it's only going to fit based on these registration keys. So what I've got here, this is just an ice cube mold. It's made out of silicone as well. Just going to use some smooth-on universal mold release, because if you try to put silicone on that, chances are it is not going to stick. But I am really making sure I get these things coated because I don't want any of that silicone sticking. Yeah, I'd say that's coated pretty good. One more. Can never use enough mold release. So I'm gonna move this down. I've already mixed up around 8 ounces, so we're just gonna make these, pour them until the silicone runs out. I'm gonna let these 10 registration keys go ahead and solidify, and then and then we'll put them. That way, we'll have them cured and ready to go on the helmet as soon as we do our thickened silicone. Thickened silicone layer. All right, so we've got 5 layers of silicone on this helmet at this point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create our thickened silicone layer, which is basically the last silicone layer before we do our mother mold. And to do that, we're going to start out with, well, this is a whole lot of silicone right here. We're going to go ahead and mix this up, and then we're going to put our thickening agent in it after we get it mixed up. So I'm just going to use one. Oh, also, while I'm thinking about it, as we put on the thickened silicone, these are our registration keys that I made, and they're ready to affix to this. And I'm just going to put a few around, basically in this configuration. And the good thing is that this silicone will stick to itself so well. It shouldn't be difficult to jacket this thing up. So anyway, let's go ahead and get to putting making our thickened silicone layer. So I'm just gonna, like I said, I'm just gonna use my hand. I'm gonna mix this up, just one hand at a time. I'm gonna keep one hand out that's good and nice and clean. You're not using any latex gloves. I know I've talked about that before, but you really want to make sure you're not using it when you're putting your hands in the silicone, because that will inhibit curing. Now we are making a lot more. Making a lot more silicone, because this thickened silicone, it's not going to spread as well. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my thixotropic agent here. It's called 5X. It's another smooth-on product. I'm just going to add several squirts. And I'm going to start mixing this up. And I'll be able to gauge how well or how thick this is just with my hand here. And it is thickening up, but it's not thick enough yet. Now another thing that I've done, if you look down here, around here, I've created a border out of clay, and I've taken the helmet off the stand. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow the silicone to build up around the bottom, and I'll be able to make an external lip. So let me show you. See how thick that is? See how it's not really dripping anymore? That's what you want. So what I'm going to do now, take these off of here. I'm just going to start spreading this around the helmet. And this layer is basically our thickened layer. It's just thickening. It's thickening up the helmet mold to give it durability. It also allows us to cover up or fill in any lingering air pockets or air bubbles. Well, I shouldn't say air bubbles, but little voids. And remember, you've only got about 20 minutes to get this stuff on here, so time is of the essence. Once we get all this on, we'll bring our spatula over, go over this and really smooth it out, and then bring more of the silicone down towards the bottom. This is one reason why I like having a table that I can walk all the way around, because it just allows me to be able to, I can move around the mold versus the moving the mold around me. And there's nothing wrong with moving the mold around you. But I just find it a little bit easier to be able to walk around the mold and see what it's doing as I'm putting the silicone on there. Then I can adjust whatever might need to be adjusted. The silicone is slightly, it's about as thick as a good buttercream frosting. Those of you who are familiar with cooking will know just about how thick that is. That'll give you a good gauge of about how thick. I would say probably like cream cheese icing. That'd be perfect. That's the perfect gauge for this. It should be about as thick as cream cheese icing. You can smooth it out two ways. You can go up with it like this. Smooth upwards, or you can go downwards. But either way you do it, I would probably smooth upwards, at least when it comes to, or you can actually do like I'm doing here and go front, go around, front to back. But at least in the lower parts here, I would go in the cheeks, I would do an upward smooth. There's plenty of silicone. Well, we've got plenty of silicone. Make sure you make enough silicone. Alright, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start sticking these on. I'm going to stick this one here. And I'm going to stick this one here. And I'm going to put one right here. Using my glove to just swoosh a little bit of silicone around that. And then I'll take my spatula and we'll clean that up a little bit. And again, remember, we're kind of at a time crunch here, so put one here. Not super concerned about the back. I'll put another one on this side. Yeah, the reason why I'm not concerned about the back is because of the fin. Since this thing has a fin on the back, that's actually going to be sort of a registration key in and of its own. Alright, so I'm going to use my fingers here because this stuff is going to start getting hard here shortly. I'm going to move the camera back a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Just going around the bottom. So I'm going to put another one of these right about here. There is our helmet with our registration keys on it. So I'm going to let this sit. I'm going to let those peaks of the on the silicone here, I'm going to let those um, fall back down and let this silicone finish curing, and then we're going to come back. We're going to remove the plastiline there at the bottom. We'll cut our silicone to make our nice lip, and then we will start working on our plasti paste jacket. We finished off our thickened layer or jacket layer of our mold, and what I've gone ahead and done is I've created a divider wall here before we get into making our mother mold. We want to create a divider wall, and what I've done is I've created that with plastiline paste. I'm sorry, plastiline clay. I've just taken it and I've made a wall, and then I've made some keys. You can see those stick out on that side, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll get this side covered with plasti paste first. Then we'll switch to the other side. Once this side is dried, we'll scrape this clay layer off, and then we'll do our other side. And then our mother mold will be complete, and our entire mold at that point will be done. So to get this started, I've already pre-measured the part A of our plasti paste, since it is 2 to 1. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to scrape this out right into this bucket, and then we're going to use our hands to mix this stuff up. Alright, so I'm going to pour my first one in. Let me get this out of my way here. I'm just going to start mixing that one. I'm just mixing it here with my hands. Then as that starts to get incorporated, I'll go ahead and pour this other one in. This stuff has 10 minutes of working pot life, and then 90 minutes of dry time in 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's not 73 degrees Fahrenheit in my shop. It's only about 65 right now. So it'll take a while. It's going to take a little bit longer for this stuff to cure than normal. I think if it was 70 degrees, we'd probably be pretty close to that same 90 minutes. But this is probably going to take closer to 2 hours. Alright, so here's what she looks like when she's mixed. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to pull this over, get it right in the center. I'm just going to use my hand here, and I'm just going to glop this stuff on, basically. But this stuff does create what's called an exothermic reaction, so it's a heat reaction. So you don't want to take too long with this. I'm just gently spreading this around. It's going to be a lot of thick areas. You want to really move those down, just like this. Just work them right down the helmet. To even this out, I'm going to use some 91% isopropyl alcohol. I'm just going to squeeze a bunch right into this steel tray here, and I'm just going to use this alcohol right here to help fill in these areas, or spread this out and really give it a nice surface. Now I'm doing right here is I'm just making sure that my Center line here stays nice and straight. For the most part, it is. You will get a little bit of pull because there's a slight contraction when this stuff hardens, but it shouldn't be much. Alright, so we're going to let this sit here, and we're going to let it finish kicking off. So we're going to let this sit here and finish kicking off, and then once it's done, we'll take our clay out of the middle here. We're also going to clean this up a little bit, this edge, and we'll see how everything looks, and we'll get our other side done. Alright, so as you can see, I have pulled the plastiline wall away from the dried or the fully cured plasti paste. I've actually taken my X-Acto knife and sort of flattened the edge a little bit around here. I'm going to move the camera so you can see, get a nice close-up of how that looks. Now, if you look at the key slots for the mother mold, those actually came out fairly well too. What I have done in the key slots that were a little bit oddly shaped, or maybe had an air pocket or something in it, what I've done is I've taken some of the plastiline paste and I've sealed up the hole with the plastiline, so that when the plasti paste goes in there, it won't go into a void or anything like that. It'll just go, and it'll be nice and smooth in there with no voids or air pockets or any place for the plasti paste to settle where it probably shouldn't settle. And it's not like I'm expecting these areas anyway to get completely filled. I just want just enough of plasti paste to fit in there to just make sure that this locks on properly. And then we can deal with, drilling our screw holes and that kind of stuff to hold it together. But for now, we're going to move on to the next step, which is going to be this side. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some universal mold release. Going to really shake it up good. Then I'm just going to spray it all on the plasti paste here. And the mold release is not going to hurt your silicone mold. There's nothing in it that's going to hurt the mold. It's just creating a nice barrier so that the plasti paste doesn't stick. And you want to really make sure you get it on there good. Actually, let me bring this closer to the camera so you can see. There we go. In the light, you can see how there's a shiny layer there on the plasti paste. That's what you want. Yep. And just to make doubly sure, I'm going to go one more time. I'm going to spray over it one more time. So I've went ahead and I've pre-measured out all my plasti paste parts. There's my part B and then my part A, and we're going to do this exactly like we did it the last time. I'm going to put my spatula there and get it ready. I'm going to dump in 1 cup full. I'm just going to start kneading this. I'm going to dump in the other cup full. I'm not going to have a huge amount of time to work with this stuff. It's 71 degrees in here, so it's actually the primo temperature for this stuff to start kicking off here soon. So move this cup out of the way. Alright, I'm just going to start plopping this stuff on here. just like we did before. And you don't want to take too long, because she will start to kick. I believe the pot life on this stuff is about 10 minutes. We found that out yesterday. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use some alcohol. I've got a gloved hand here, just like we did yesterday, or in the other half. I'm going to use this brush with alcohol on it here to just smooth this out nicely. The other thing you can do is using your gloved hand, you can go over this with your hand, again making sure you're using gloves, but you're going to get some of that plastic paste sticking to you. The only time it's not going to stick to you is once it starts to really kick. Alright, so at this point, all we can do now is wait. It's going to take this about an hour or so, probably an hour and a half to fully cure. So once we come back, we'll open this puppy up, and yeah, we'll get started on making our lip at the bottom. We'll drill our holes in the mother mold for the screws to hold it together, and we should be good to go. This side is relatively cured at this point. It's nice and hard. Probably still has a little bit of cure time left, but I want to go ahead and open this up. So I'm just using a flathead screwdriver, and gently just run it through here and gently prying. Just want to take your time and be patient with it. I did get a little bit thin in a couple places here, but alright, so based on this thing is completely apart, so let's see if we can. Alright, here we go. The back really wants to open up, so we'll start there. There we go. Oh, perfect. There we go. So obviously those registration keys, some of them worked out well, some of them didn't, but either way, looks like they're all going to fit, and that's what matters. Set this over here. So when we go to put this back on, it'll go on just like that. We're going to drill in here and put some screws in to hold that together nice and tight, but for now I'm going to pull this off. Now all we have to do is make our lip on the bottom of this, which that's our last little bit, is to finish up this lip. But we have our mother mold completed. It fits together just like that. And pan out here just a little bit. And there we have it. So one of the final things we're going to do here is we're going to reinforce this lip just a little bit with some thickened silicone. I went ahead and mixed this up, and I put some Thivex in it to make it nice and thick. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the popsicle stick here, the stir stick that I've got. I'm just going to use that, and I'm going to go around the edge here a little bit and just put some of this thickened silicone down here. And this is so we can create this border. It just reinforces this border at the bottom, or this lip, I should say. And what this lip is going to do is it's going to protect the resin like a dam. It's going to keep the resin from coming out, spilling out all over the place, and really just making a huge mess when we're doing our actual slush casting. And then once this dries, we will trim it up here right along the edge with an X-Acto to make it nice and square. Once all this cures, we really won't need that helmet to be in this silicone jacket at this point. I'd say that line is around, that wall is about a ½ inch thick. Maybe, actually, maybe more like a ¼ inch, I'm sorry. It's more like a ¼ inch thick. And I'm just going around the bottom here and sealing up where we've got a defined separation there in the jacket. The reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want that to be a possible tear point in the mold. I don't think it will, but I also don't want to take any chances. One, this is a very expensive project, and two, I want to give myself all the advantages, this being something that I'm going to use over and over and over again. I want to make sure that the mold has got really got some fortitude behind it, so it'll last a long time. So we ended up with a little bit of leftover silicone, but not a big deal. So let's let this cure, and then we're going to trim out this smaller lip here that's left over, and then our actual silicone portion of the mold is done. Alright, so our lip here has dried. It's cured, it's nice and firm. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off this thinner inner lip that we're not going to need. I'm just going to use a nice, fresh, sharp X-Acto blade. So now that our lip is complete, we can go ahead and we can demold the buck. So I'm just going to gently pull this out here and just flip these edges down. And this is the tough job because this edge is very thick. There we go. Once you get it flipped down like that, you want to be real gentle if you have places like this. Pull all those out. We'll keep pulling this mold jacket down. There we go. Perfect. Now we can just demold the front here, just like that. This is definitely a good mold. We just got to do a little bit of fix-ups there, but I think we have adequately shown how you make a silicone mold of a bucket, and how you also make the mother mold. So the last thing we've got to do to our mother mold is we need to put our retaining screws in that hold it together for the molding process when we're pouring the resin in and doing our slush casting or our rotation. So what we're going to be using is we're going to be using 4 of these thumb screws. These are 1.5 inches long, so they should be plenty long enough. And they're a 1/4 by 20 as far as the thread on them. So we're going to use 4 of those, and we're going to put 2 here, and then we're going to put 1 down here, and then 1 back on the fin. So there'll be 4. We're going to space them out. I'm just going to open it up just ever so gently to see where my keys on my mother mold are. So we're going to put, let's do 1 right here. Actually, yeah, that'll work. We'll do 1 right here. Just going to just making a little circle there. Then I'm drawing another circle with my Sharpie around it, so I've got a good idea of where the hole is going to be, where I'm going to grind down. Start slow. There we go. So there's hole number 1. Hole number 2. Hole number 3. And all the time you want to squeeze these together to make sure that they're lined up properly. Hole number 4. And I'm just using just a really small grinder bit. It's actually a Dremel bit. So here we have our bolted together and finished mother mold. You can see that our thumb screws here, they work well. When we want to take them off, they just come right off. And when we put them in, they tighten down nicely and really give us a good, firm mother mold. And there's our one on the front. So here is our completed mold. She is ready for casting. Of course, if you see if there's dirt or little bits of anything in there, you can always wipe those out. Obviously, it's always a good idea to make sure that your mother mold is free of any impurities or anything that would cause issues with your resin pour. But everything is good to go in here. Even the letters came out fairly well. I was very happy with how they came out. So thanks for joining me for episode 30. This has been a Warmaster's Workshop. The video tutorials have been a huge success. I've gotten tons of feedback on how they've helped people ever since I've been doing these since 2016, 2017. Lots of people have been able to work through problems with their own armor looking at these tutorials, and hopefully this tutorial is going to help you overcome any fears you have on making your own helmet mold for casting. just a final note on that. Remember, this is probably one of the most expensive things you can do. It cost me around $400 just to make this this mold. Now I do have quite a bit of um, silicone left over. I can probably make another helmet mold with the silicone that I have. I'm probably a smaller mold. Maybe in the future we'll do a female helmet tutorial. But anyway, this is what we've got, and hopefully you've learned how to do this. So yeah, thanks for joining me for this Warmasters Workshop tutorial number 30, and we will see you next time in Warmasters Workshop.